You see a guy hit the ball out the ballpark, grand slam home run to win a baseball game. And that same guy can come up tomorrow in that situation and miss the ball and lose the ball game. It can bring you up here, and don't get too damn cocky, because tomorrow it can bring you down there. See? But one thing about it, though, you know it always will be a tomorrow. You got me today, but I'm coming back.
Welcome back to Braves Country Baseball. And we're going to do something a little different today as we continue the Once Upon a Pastime series. We're going to talk about the Negro Leagues. And I went to the Negro League Hall of Fame in Kansas City, Missouri. It was the summer of 2009. I happened to be in Kansas City. I'm an old restaurant guy, and I was in a chef competition. That's the short of it. It was the national championships. Finished in the top 10, by the way, and finished the highest for first-timers. I was very disappointed in myself because I did not win. That's just your competitive juices. And it wasn't until my chef, my instructor, who went with me to the championships, said, hey, you look glum, you look down. And I said, yeah, man, I did this wrong and I did that wrong. I won't get into the weeds of all that. He said, you finished first for rookies. And we had planned to go the year after, but I ended up moving, and long story short, didn't end up going back that second year to compete, because to get there, you had to win. So I won the gold medal for the state of Florida to get there. And that's how I ended up there. You had regional, super regional, all that stuff. And then it's just like almost any other competition. You have to go through things. And when I got to go to that championship, I got to pick one of my instructors. I was working in the restaurant business, but I was also going to culinary school at the time. And so I kicked the crap out of a couple of people from the CIA and the Culinary Institute of America. And if you're not familiar with that, man, that's like a guy in just a ho-hum law school kicking the crap out of some folks from Harvard. It's like that kind of stuff. So that part was really cool after you soak it all in. But at first I was ticked off. But I picked him to go with me because he was the only sports fan of all of our chefs. And I knew that he would enjoy it. He was a big baseball fan. He enjoyed the Braves. I want to say his favorite team was someone from the Midwest, but it's been so long I can't remember. We talked all sports, and he was in college football as well. But the point is, I picked him because I was like, man, if I'm going to go out there and compete and go to Kansas City, I noticed the Royals were at home. We went to the Royals Cardinals game. That happened to be on Father's Day, and our plane landed that day. And the short of it is, he was going to be out of town, missing his daughter on Father's Day. So I decided to treat him to the baseball game. It was only fair. And we had a very good time. Albert Pujols, he had a moonshot into the water fountain. We were sitting right there. It was really cool. But I knew I was going to want to do some baseball stuff. And then I found out that the Negro League Hall of Fame was there, and I went there. He ended up having to do something else. So I went by myself. It's funny, the two Hall of Fames that I've been to, the Negro League and then the National Baseball Hall of Fame, both of them I've gone to by myself. It's just the way it's lined up. And I've enjoyed both of them. So if you get a chance, you go to Kansas City, you go out there to get some good barbecue, make sure to hit up the Hall of Fame because it's phenomenal. And he was already one of my favorite players. But I went to that, and I learned more about Buck O'Neil, and that's why I'm starting with him. And he became my favorite player in that league. And honestly, of all the players I've ever read about, top 3, top 5. I think top 3, to be honest. I've read a couple of books on him, and the book that he himself, his biography. It's a great title. It was either I was just on time or just in time. I'll look it up here in a second because I don't want to misquote that. I ended up giving it to a friend of mine who really wanted to read it, and it was very, very good. But there it is. I was right on time. And the whole synopsis of the book is this. I might actually have to get that copy back from someone just to be able to go over it. But he was talking about how people would come at him all the time and say, man, you played in the Negro leagues, but if you were born, so he was born in 1911 in Carabel, Florida. Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, little Southern guy. So, by the way, lived to the age of 94. So passed away 2006 and was living in Kansas City, Missouri. And I was very aware of this when I went into Kansas City, because I was like, well, this is really cool. Played for the Kansas City Monarchs from 1938 through 1948. And he had a lifetime batting average of 258, 9 home runs, 175 RBI. You're like, this guy, what? What's the big deal about this guy? And you might ask yourself, well, why is Buck O'Neil in the Hall of Fame? So he got in there as an executive. He managed, coached, scouted for nearly 8 decades. But his legacy to me, he's been in DAWGS. In fact, you just heard him a second ago when we were coming out of the break. I had to scramble during the break. I was like, where the hell is that one? And I love that. I love that quote from him. Don't get too cocky, because baseball will humble you. But the fact that he was an ambassador of the game is the best way I can put it. He was a great ambassador of the game. So people would say to him, man, if you were born just a little later in the century, born 1911. So what they're essentially saying is, man, if you were born 10 years later, if you were born in 1921 or 15 years later, 1926, you would have came up out of the color barrier, past the color barrier, and your life would have been so much different, so much better, all that kind of stuff. Because the Negro Leagues, honestly, they didn't have, in Major League Baseball at that time, did not have the best travel experiences and whatnot and pay. But the Negro Leagues were most of the time just a touch even below that. Just like any owner, they're trying to jam the money in their pocket. So they didn't spend a lot of money. They'd still be doing it if unions didn't come around, right? But what I love about Buck O'Neil, and I'll probably try to find some of the other quotes that he's for some of the other breaks. But he had just a great outlook, and he said, man, if I would have been born later, I would have never gotten a chance to play in the Negro Leagues. He loved it. He loved the camaraderie. He loved the game of baseball. And he didn't hold it against the people of that time. He just looked at it as we're growing as a country, growing as a nation, growing as a society, humanity. But had the color barrier gotten, let's say the color barrier gets broken in 1930. What he's saying is, man, I would have never gotten to play in the Negro Leagues. And he loved every minute of it. So it's an interesting perspective. And I take that with me in life. Obviously, I didn't go through what he went through, could never even imagine. But I think of that moniker all the time, of the fact that I was right on time. I think I always misquote it and say I was just in time, but same thing. I was right on time. Because had I been born later in life, later in time, we'll say 10 years. Yeah, well, first of all, I'd be a little younger today, so that's great, right? But you could say that no matter where you're at in the calendar of the great calendar, right? But the things that I would have missed, that I enjoyed thoroughly in my life, that I still look back on, and until my brain fails me, I'm going to continue to love. Look, if I was born 10 years later, I would have missed the infancy of ESPN when it first came on and that whole thing. I still remember that, even though we all get ticked off at what they do on a daily basis with some of the stuff that they pull nowadays. That's not what ESPN was when we were kids. In the 80s, the 90s, it was about the sports. Even into the majority of the 2000s. It's only been the last 10-ish years, 10 plus, we'll say, even if you want to be aggressive and say last 15 years, that ESPN has really gone the direction that they've gone in, where it's not the same, right? But it used to be about, folks who are my age and even older, do you remember getting excited and waking up in the morning and running to the TV to turn on Sports Center? And I would watch that thing. Let's say I woke up on a day off, I didn't have to be anywhere, and being in the restaurant business a lot of times during the week, you remember running to the television, turning it on to see the highlights, because it was the only way you could consume it in the 80s and 90s. And I would leave it on 3-4 times in a row. That's all you got was the replay from the night before. I don't remember when they first started doing the daytime Sports Center, but I know that thing would play till noon, if not later. I don't even remember what they did before they started arguing and screaming at each other and telling you about Aaron Rodgers and LeBron James every 15 seconds. And it's like that with and I can go through all the annals of sports that I've seen over my lifetime. The fact that when I look at, right on time, it's a great way to look at your life. Now, there are younger people that may going to say, well, but if I was born then, I wouldn't have. Yeah, I get it. You're probably going to live longer than me. You should. And I hope you do. And you'll probably see some things that I'll never see. But when my dad, my grandfather would say, I'm glad I'm not born in your age, because now you're dealing with this, this, and this. And I got to see this, this, and this. It's all about your perspective. And I would say, Dad, if I could talk to him today, Grandpa, if I could talk to him today, can you believe the technology that we deal with today? It's so easy to consume whatever you want to consume. So Buck O'Neil, I wanted to highlight him. It wasn't his playing numbers. It was the fact that he was a great ambassador of the game. And I highly recommend his book. I'm looking at the list here. There's another one. I've only read clips of this. I don't believe I've gotten a hold of the actual copy. It's called The Soul of Baseball, a road trip through Buck O'Neill's America. I know people are big on that. And the Right on Time one to me is the one that, if I can only, because I haven't read the other one. Now that I know that this one exists, I'm definitely going to look it up. But it's what you wanted. It's really where you want to go with Buck O'Neill. Just, I mean, and it hits such. You see him on camera and you see the interviews. Such a magnetic personality. I mean, even when he wasn't smiling, the way his eyes would twinkle and he talked, it was like he was smiling. And I loved hearing him in the different docs talking about the game of baseball. There's one, I don't think I even have that on clip, but he was talking about, I must though, because I know it pretty well, where he's talking about, and I didn't realize at the time, but now doing the math, he would have been around 8, 9 years old when this was going on, talking about the 1919 year, dealing with all of the Judge Mountain Landis scandal, the court case. They find out everybody is the 8 men out of the White Sox is what I'm trying to get to. And he was talking about the fact that, and this is another thing, you're talking about right on time. Babe Ruth was right on time. He gets traded to New York just in time to save baseball. If he was born much earlier, this wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been the splash that it was. If he was born much later, he might have been too late to save baseball. Babe Ruth was right on time. Jackie Robinson was right on time. And I love that perspective from Buck. Because he's not talking about, hey man, don't talk about what you think that I missed. I can tell you what you missed. And that's the way I look at a lot of things, especially, we talk more sports than anything like that, but in the sports world, man, if I was born later in life, I guess that's a yogiism. How could you be born later in life? If I was born later in the century, I would have never gotten to grow up watching Dan Marino zip it. I would have missed Nolan Ryan. I would not have seen Dale freaking Murphy play. And if I was a Gen Zer right now, I would have missed Chipper Jones. Oof. You can have that life. I don't want anything to do with it. Now, my dad and my grandfather would try to tell me, yeah, but you never got to see, and they would throw someone at me. And I'm like, you're right. I didn't get to see Mickey Mantle. My grandfather would talk on and on about Hank Aaron. I never got to see him play. But he's probably the reason why I became a Braves fan, is because he would my grandfather loved Hank Aaron. But anyways, I wanted to start off with Buck because I felt like it was this is what got me interested in going to the Hall of Fame. And then you learn all their other stories, and it's just, it's what makes baseball absolutely phenomenal. Let's go ahead before we do a complete transition. Want to go ahead and go into the next guy. So the next guy that I have, and I'm trying to find a picture that I can actually pull up. Sometimes we have issues with this. Is I think I found one. Here we go. All right, the next guy that I wanted to bring up is a guy that I think more people need to know his story because of what he meant to the actual game of, well, the league, the Negro Leagues. That's Rube Foster. He's known as, his nickname is the father of black baseball, the father of the Negro Leagues, right? And Rube Foster was looked upon in the first century, in the first decade of the 20th century, to be possibly the best pitcher in the Negro Leagues. Rube Foster, now he's a little different look to this because he ends up being part owner. He ends up being a guy that, and this is one of the reasons why it's a little difficult to rank a lot of these guys. And one of the reasons is in the Negro Leagues, they did not do a great job of tallying statistics. So a lot of it is off of legend and rumor. But the way I look at it is, like when someone will try to tell you that Josh Gibson, I don't know, one of the things, we'll do Josh Gibson shortly, but one of the things that they'll try to tell you is he hit like 82 or 84 home runs in a season, but a lot of it was barnstorming tours, so it wasn't a true season. So they played a boat ton of games, and they're not even 100% sure on the numbers. This is the way I look at it. Were they playing against the same players? No. And can you compare? No, but I'm going off of the guys that were the best in the league that they were in. And those guys could have played in any league, any era, just like I've said a million times before, Babe Ruth could have played in today's game. People think he wouldn't have. Babe Ruth would have been slamming the ball out. What we know now, launch angle and all that kind of stuff, he would have consumed that. And certain guys are just born with the ability to hit. So same thing with the guys in the Negro Leagues. He played for the Chicago Leland Giants from 07 to 1910. He won, first of all, his career winning record, 723 wins. And once again, the records are a little skewed because some of these games that they would give them wins on were not against legitimate teams, but it doesn't matter. We're going off of their numbers in their league, whatever. For 21 seasons, 723 wins, 400 losses, 644 winning percentage. Pretty darn good. He had seasons where he, like for instance, where he appeared in 69 games, had 40 wins, 49 wins, 49 wins, 45 wins, 55 wins in 1921. Most miraculous thing to me about that is he had 55 wins, and he was born, and he was in 1921, he was 42 years old. Now he ended up with the Chicago American Giants. He ended up teaming up with Comiskey of the White Sox to bring the team to Chicago, to bring a team into Chicago, excuse me. And that's how he ended up being part owner. The thing that I wanted to hit up with him before we have to go to break here in a second, he was one of the guys that was hurt by the color barrier being broken, because when you first hit the color barrier, Jackie Robinson goes into major leagues, and you think about how great that was, how outstanding it was, but what you don't think about is the ones left behind. Jackie Robinson goes into the major leagues, breaks the color barrier. W does it for the Indians, and then all the other guys come around, and they're going into the major leagues, and then the next thing you know, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, everybody wants to go see them play the best of the best. If you're a Black American at the time, it's very Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson, where you want to see, can your guys go out there and whip who was considered the best? The Negro Leagues got left behind. And so guys like Rube Foster, who died in 1930, he died before the color barrier, but I'm talking about he was the father of black baseball. They talk about it quite a bit. Buck talked about it quite a bit, how the guys who came along. So I really call him the grandfather of the Negro Leagues. But anyways, Negro Leagues were very, very popular going into the 30s and 40s. And then it gets dissolved a few years after the color barrier because nobody wanted to go to the games, because all of the people that were going to those games are now going to watch Jackie Robinson. And it was only going to continue to get worse. It was very much like the remember the Tom Hanks, Gina Davis movie, League of Their Own, that was based on a true story. And they had pretty decent attendance numbers when they were playing, but when the men came back from war, the attendance numbers fell off. So you see a good thing have a negative, and we see this a lot in the world, but it should be noted that guys like Rube Foster were building something, and the guys that came after Foster. But he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 81 as a pioneer executive. Honestly, that was well overdue. But Foster in the National Baseball Hall of Fame for everything that he did for the game. All right, let's go ahead and take a break, reset, and we come back. Next up, let's talk about Josh Gibson and a couple of the others that you may not remember. We will be back in a flash here on Braves Country HD, Braves Country Today. And we're doing Once Upon a Pastime series. Today we're hitting up the Negro Leagues. We will be back in a flash. Keep it locked in here, y'all. Braves Country HD. Please like and subscribe today. YouTube.com/@Braves Country. All right, welcome back. And man, we have on the screen right now is Josh Gibson. Who was Josh Gibson? Why is everybody making such a big deal about Josh Gibson? Josh Gibson was basically known as the Babe Ruth of the Negro Leagues. And he played baseball from 1930 to 1946. And he was born in 1911, just like Buck O'Neil. By 1946, his skills had deteriorated a little bit. And the thing about him is that it's been known about Josh Gibson that he was a little more controversial and whatnot. And so when people talk about, when they broke the color barrier, there was actually at one point, there was talk about the Dodgers focus being on Josh Gibson because he was such incredible talent. Now he finished and realized he was a part of these barnstorming tours. So he played in a lot more games than you would in a regular season for Major League Baseball. Okay. So take that with a grain of salt, but he's been credited with 608 home runs. Some believe it was much less. Some believe it was much more. Doesn't matter. Anybody who watched him play talked about, you know what they always say when they say, man, so-and-so, when they hit the ball, it sounds different off the bat. That's what they said about Josh Gibson. Basically, that he could just absolutely pound the hell out of the ball. He was 6'1", 220 pounds, He was a catcher. He also played a little outfield and first base, but he was known as a catcher. And had he been able to play in Major League Baseball at the time, I don't care if his numbers wouldn't have been as good. Supposedly, his career batting average was .373. What? That would be what 6-7 points higher than Ty Cobb, who has the best batting average in the history of Major League Baseball. Now, the thing about these games that they played quite a bit, they didn't play game. Not all of their games were played against teams in their league. Sometimes they were barnstorming tours, and that's where these statistics kind of get in the weeds. And what's strange about it is he's only credited with 166 home runs, 612 runs scored. But the 166 home runs, and I'm looking at this on the fly as I'm coming through this, the most they give him credit for is 20 in a year. But there's talks about how he hit 80-something in one season. Why was that? It's because of the barnstorming tour. So they go out and they play, it looks like typically around half as many games as Major League Baseball at the time. For instance, I'll just grab one of his better years. I'll grab 1937. And he had 20 home runs, 73 RBI, 417 batting average. But that's one of the years that people swear that he had many more because they hit so many, went on so many barnstorming tours. So that's where he gets a little in the weeds on these guys' overall numbers. But his 612 runs scored is the same number that they've come, or some have come up with, for how many home runs he's hit in his entire career. And it's really hard to slice and dice it and keep it separate. So that's why I led off with that number. But any way you look at it, let's just look at this. What are we always talking about? OPS and OPS plus. Listen to this OPS plus. If it's even remotely close to being true, his OPS plus, we were talking about guys the other day who, in the 140s, 150s, 170. 214 OPS plus. His OPS for his career, 1.176 and 1166 OPS plus. A sluggo of 718. On base percentage of 458 and batting average of 373. I don't even care if any of this is accurate. What a great story, right? He hit above 400 in 1937 and in 1939. He also hit 500 in 1930, but only had 4 at-bats. But he also hit, listen to this one, 466 in 1943. An OPS of 1427. What? The one in 1937, an OPS of 1474. So it just gives you an idea. He was clubbing the hell out of the ball. He's just, regardless how you look at it, the guy was a phenomenal player for a long period of time. And kids growing up watching and listening to Negro League Baseball, he was their Babe Ruth. Because they talked about not just the home runs he hit, but the distance that he would just club them. And so that's Babe Ruth in a nutshell right there. All right, the next guy. Next guy we're going to talk about Papa Bell. He was a center fielder and a pitcher. What? I thought only Shohei Ohtani. No, Shohei Ohtani isn't the only person to ever play baseball. He was. Now, he's a guy that when you talk about the annals of history, he may not be looked upon in the same breath as some of these other guys, you know, like the Josh Gibson, right? But Cool Papa Bell had, if nothing else, you got to talk about him because supposedly his speed was incredible. He was inducted into the Major League Baseball, or the National Baseball Hall of Fame, 1974. Here are the cliff notes on his stats. 8-time All-Star, lifetime batting average of .337, 2-time World Series champs, Negro Leagues. His career entered in 1942, just before the color barrier was broken. Started playing in 1922 for the St. Louis Stars. And some of these statistics get really confusing. So I see two different batting averages listed for him in the same breath on the same page. It says his lifetime batting average was .337, and then it says his batting average was .325. I'm like, well, which one is it? Now, he was typically a leadoff hitter. And he was referred to as cool after striking out Oscar Charleston, and he added Papa to the nickname because he said it sounded better. Gotta love that, which it does. It's a really cool nickname, Cool Papa Bell. At first, he only made his appearances in the outfield, but by 1924, working on defensive skills, appearing more in the outfield. At first, he only made the occasional outfield appearance, but then he worked on his defensive skills, I should say. So a couple of years later, they started putting him in the outfield, and he was supposedly extremely fast. 285 stolen bases. But the great line is one of the reasons why I was drawn to him when I first started, following the league was I'm trying to remember. I think it was Satchel Paige that said it about him, but he said that Cool Papa Bell was so fast that he could turn off the light and be in bed before the room went dark. So it's just great little things like that. And obviously it's embellished, but that's what the great things about baseball. It's full of great quotes. He played for what is that 25 seasons? Nothing else. We know one thing. He was in shape. Debuted in 1922. 52 years later, he finally got put into the Hall of Fame. But what stands out with him more than anything else was his speed, able to get on base percentage, by the way, of .394, and evidently a pretty light hitter. He did have 57 home runs, but OPS was .840. But the big thing with him was his speed, and evidently a very good defender so in other words, originally he supposedly was not a very good defender, and over a 2-year span, the next thing you know, he'd worked on his defensive skills, and I don't think they gave out gold gloves in the Negro Leagues, but would have been one of those types. Here's the other thing. 5,341st person to debut in the history of what they call now. See, now they've combined the major leagues. But by 1922, you'd already had 5,341 people playing some form of professional baseball. The major leagues, the Negro leagues, etc. You can go back to Players League, the Federal League, all of them. So the ones that have been accredited for that, you already had 5,341 people that have made that debut. That's 1922. So think about all the people that have played this great game. I guess one of the reasons why I love this game is because I love the numbers. I really did. I just, the numbers, because you can compare them. He did this and he did that at this time, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's cool, Papa Bell, for you. And I just felt like he needed to be talked about, because I don't think he was talked about enough. And that kind of leads me to my next guy. This guy was looked upon as one of the greats of his era. Let's go ahead and bring him in. All right, so the next guy that we're going to, his name is Oscar Charleston. And I think he's a guy, I kind of pulled some of my friends that really do follow baseball. And I don't believe many people, I don't think enough people know him. I'll put it that way. I think it's a little strange that he is not nearly well as known as he should be. Oscar Charleston finished with a .365 batting average. Oscar Charleston's OPS was .1064, a 184 OPS plus. What? Now, just like some of the others that we went over in the Once Upon a Pastime series with the Pioneers Forgotten, Charleston was born in 1896. And he debuted in 1920, so right around the Cool Papa Bell era. And I really want to do more research on him and maybe revisit him down the road, but why was he overlooked? Because he's not one of the names that I heard growing up. I heard of Josh Gibson. I heard of Cool Papa Bell and whatnot. But he played for the Pittsburgh Crawfords, which is one of the storied franchises in the league. He played for the Philadelphia Stars. He played for the Harrisburg Giants. He played for the Indianapolis ABCs. He started in 1920 and he finished in 1941. So a little too old. And maybe that had something to do with it. The whole color barrier being broken, 6 years later? Now, he wasn't a prolific home run hitter. Maybe that had something. Maybe people just wanted to focus on the handful of stars. But I just felt like Oscar Charleston needed to be talked about. Stolen bases, 210, so solid home run hitter, 143 of those games marked. RBIs. He wasn't a big RBI guy. He was a guy that was at the top of the lineup, 365 hitter. And he played center field and first base. primarily center field and then later on first baseman. But he was voted in to the Hall of Fame by the Negro League Committee in 1976. So one of the earlier ones voted in, but you never get enough about him. So I just felt like we need to shine a little bit of light on him. As I learn more and more about these guys, and I plan on doing so, we'll talk more and more about this down the road. But I just felt like Oscar Charleston. I mean, this guy batted .433 in 21, .405 in 1924, .427 in 1925. .429. Well, he only played in a few games, so we won't count that one. I was about to bring up the 1940. It looks like by the time he hit 1938, so the last 5 years of what we just talked about, he was only playing a few games. So his health must have really failed him. And so essentially it says 18, but he really played 13 years. So when you think about that, the numbers are a little more impressive. But that is Oscar Charleston in a nutshell. And he is one of those guys. You know what it kind of reminds me of? It's the same way that Sam Crawford was overlooked. And sometimes it's because of when you were born, the media exposure, and then sometimes you don't know why. But my guess is going to be because he came about in the time period where he was getting overshadowed by guys like Cool Papa Bell, but also Josh Gibson. So that leads us to our last one that we'll do today. And this guy, you got to talk this guy if you're going to talk the Negro Leagues. So there was no way I was leaving him off. And I'm sure a lot of y'all already know where I'm going, but here we go. See the screen here on Praise Country HD. You know exactly where I'm going. If you cannot, well, and by the way, we'll do Jackie Robinson, that kind of stuff on a different type of deal. I want to talk about the guys that lived the Negro Leagues for a majority of their career. Satchel Paige, whether he was born just in time or not, Satchel Paige continued to play baseball. In fact, Satchel Paige came in and played in the major leagues in 1965 for one game. Satchel Paige was born in 1906. He was 58 years old when he took the mound. Oldest player in the history of baseball. It's one of the reasons why he did it. He came in and he threw 3 innings that day. Gave up 1 hit. And looks like, doesn't look like he did not give up a run. Anyway, you look at that, that's impressive. 58 years old, going in and give 3 innings. We have a hard time getting 3 innings out of some of our starters nowadays. They're in their early 20s. Page started playing in 1927, the Birmingham Black Barons. He continued to play. 1931, he went to the Cubs. That was the Cleveland Cubs. He played for the Pittsburgh Crawfords. He played with the Kansas City Monarchs. He played with Buck O'Neil. I would have loved to have been a fly on that wall, listen to some of their conversations. Very lively personality. played for the Kansas City Monarchs all the way to 1947, and then went to play with the Cleveland Indians in 48. After W broke the color barrier, he went and played with the Indians. And so at that age, there he is in his early 40s. What did he do here? In 1948, he appeared in 7 games, had a 2.48 ERA, 72 innings pitched. 7 games and 72 innings pitched. I mean, he was pitching complete games at that age in the majors. 2.48 ERA his first year, 3.04 his second year. This is in the major leagues. And then his third year, 4.79, and his fifth and final full year was 1952. So he played from 48, 49, 51, 52. Did not play in 1950. And during that time span, those 4 years, he was, 25 and 22. So a winning record even in his 40s in the major leagues. What he's credited with is 1,500 strikeouts through 1,751 innings. That seems incredibly low to me, because all I've ever heard about him is that he was a strikeout machine. But he wasn't credited for a lot of strikeouts per 9. But it was a different era, and guys were slapsticking and using the cross and just nubbing at the ball. So different era. It just seems low when you look at it, and the fact that he played in the 50s. But if you really think about his entire career, most of it was in the 20s and 30s. I guess it does make sense. He was voted in to the Hall of Fame in 1971 by the committee. And he is looked upon as one of the greatest of all time. And anyone that played with him in that era will tell you he was the best. He had ERAs as low as 194, 154. I mean, some of the others, 206, 2. His career ERA was 273. But a lot of that was elevated when he went into the major leagues at a very late age. So that's just a little bit of it. We'll do more of the Negro Leagues down the road. I just wanted to touch on it because we've done a lot of this stuff here recently, and I want to make sure that that we touch on that. But do yourself a favor and do your own research, and y'all have a great day, and hopefully you got something out of this. I know I do. Every time I do one of these, I get something out of it. Really enjoy learning the history of the game. Y'all have a great one.
Goodbye, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart, goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks for listening to Braves Country with Mac McGee and the Armchair Quarterbacks on 99.1 FM WQEE The Key in Noonan, Georgia, and simulcasting on youtube.com/@Braves Country. Braves Country comes your way weekdays, 3 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern. Please follow, like, and subscribe today. Armchair Quarterback Radio, your first choice for Southern sports.
Something of the 5th of September. Something of the 5th of September. She said a lot that I can't remember. Something of the 5th. Can I get another cigarette, please? Can I get another cigarette, please? Yeah, I know.